You already understand what it is. Not everyone is cut out for this path, and not everyone will understand why you move the way you do. That is because you were not meant to follow, to blend in, or play by rules that were never intended for you. You were created to change the environment, rewrite the screenplay, and step into something larger. They know it too. That is why they watch. That is why they whisper. That's why people strive to make sense of something they weren't supposed to understand. But here is the reality. You do not owe anybody an explanation. You were sent to disrupt, break cycles, and establish a new norm. And you're doing it without using force or proving yourself, but rather by just walking in what has already been written for you. They spend time trying to figure you out, but you're too busy doing business your way. Elevation does not come with announcements, and authority does not need confirmation. You just move differently, and that is precisely why they cannot ignore you. They discarded your trip before it even started. They muttered among themselves, certain that any impediment would be your undoing. They relished your challenges, believing that each failure demonstrated your limitations. But the moment they never expected has come. The hidden forces that were previously against you have transformed, uniting in your favor. What was previously unyielding now falls under your feet. The weight of a turning tide pushes down underneath. Bills are irrevocable. The fundamental basis on which they stood so solidly has shifted, and they are no longer in control of the situation. The powers that held you in place have crumbled, and those who formerly held the shackles now stand still, witnessing a truth they refused to accept. The change has arrived, and they can feel it in the stillness that used to be filled with laughing. The equilibrium they believed was permanent is unraveling in front of them. The building they erected brick by brick to secure their position at the top is displaying cracks that they can no longer ignore. They misjudged, assuming that their power was absolute and that their names alone would keep them relevant. But the tide has retreated, leaving behind an unusual silence. The words they previously demanded with power now ring hollow in the air. Those who formerly sought their praise scarcely move their heads. The same venues that they passed through with ease are now shutting their doors. For the first time, they are the ones knocking, waiting for answers that will never arrive. They feel it before they say it. The change has left them standing in the ruins of a history that no longer bears significance. What seemed to be an unshakable hierarchy is crumbling, slipping past their grip. Like something intangible, they controlled the narratives. They directed the talks, the rules they establish. None of it has the same force now. They spent years setting the pace, selecting who would succeed and who would be forgotten. However, the stage has shifted, and their formerly powerful shouts are now just echoes in a realm they no longer control. They watch from the sidelines, unable to halt what is happening. The control they imagined was permanent has eluded them, and they can't understand why the world no longer bends in their favor. You continue on, unaffected by their expectations, criticism, or skepticism. That is what worries them the most. They convinced themselves that without their approval, you would never ascend, that without their presence, your feet would stumble, and that their absence would be the burden that kept you down. But the truth has emerged, irrefutable and obvious. They required you more than you ever needed them. They lived on the energy you exuded, misinterpreting their closeness to your light as evidence of their own significance. Now, when you advance past them, reclaiming every area where they attempted to belittle you, they are confronted with a reality they are unprepared for. They try to take the initiative to reclaim what was once theirs. But it's too late. Their effect has diminished. Their names, once whispered with admiration or terror, now have no significance. And as they strive to find their place in a changing society, they are confronted with an unexpected reality. They are no longer the ones being monitored. Their grasp is slipping, and they can feel it in every unanswered message, every indifferent gaze. Every instant, they are confronted with silence. Where there was previously enthusiastic attention, the world no longer works in their favor. And the reality is sinking in like an unwanted shadow. They base their confidence on a delusion, thinking that they could hold control eternally. But cycles cannot be changed, and the weight of their previous decisions has accumulated like a storm above. It smashes down mercilessly. And now they fall beneath the weight of a reckoning they never anticipated. Their once powerful presence is receding, and their efforts to recapture it seem frantic or empty. The assurance they once had has dissipated, replaced by a growing concern that this is not a momentary transition. It is the unavoidable result of a fact they refuse to confront. The illusion is collapsing piece by piece, and it is impossible to save what was never genuine in the first place. The meticulously built personalities, the fabricated influence, and the inflated feeling of power. Everything falls under the weight of truth. They once dictated the story, believing that their words had the ability to influence destiny. However, the magic has shattered, leaving them vulnerable. Their eyes show a silent familiarity, which betrays them. They understand that they have lost something that cannot be regained. What previously worked seamlessly now seems forced. The games they played turned against them, and for the first time, they were not in control of the board. They can't stop the rumors that undermine their carefully constructed narrative, cannot undo the clarity that now surrounds them. Worst of all, they cannot change the course of events that were predetermined. This was never their tale to tell. It was merely a temporary situation. As their influence diminishes, something bigger takes its place. The energy they strove to stifle now surges unabated, free of the constraints they attempted to impose. They don't comprehend how you remain unaffected, how you go ahead without hesitation, without the need for approval, and without respect for the influence they formerly had over other people. But it is what bothers them the most. Your presence no longer matches their expectations. The authority they professed to have was never genuine. And now they see the change. What they constructed was precarious, depends on deceit, while what you carry is unshakable and irrefutable. They cling for relics of a past in which they had complete control, but it is sliding beyond of grasp, and the struggle is visible in every action they make. They were confident you needed them, yet without their approval and recognition, you would never succeed. But now the reality is apparent. They were the ones that relied on you. They relied on your presence, mistaking closeness to your light for confirmation of their own significance. But now you stride ahead, unaffected by their skepticism and opposition, and they are left to watch while the foundation underneath them crumbles. They keep trying, hoping to restore what was once theirs. However, there is no way back. Their former influence is no longer relevant, and the audience they previously commanded has turned away. The performance is finished. The illusion has been destroyed, and they are aware of it because for the first time, they are no longer the focus of the tale. The stone the builders rejected has now become the cornerstone. Psalm 118 verse 22, they believed they could pick who would rise and who would stay in the shadows. They fooled themselves that they were the gatekeepers, holding the keys to power, influence, and success. But they never realized that when God establishes a calling, no one can stand in its way. They constructed high barriers, stacked the deck in their favor, controlled the entrances, and established their own rules. And yet, here you are, not with their consent or agreement, but by divine power. See, when anything is genuinely anointed, it can't be contained. It does not need a place at their table since God has already provided another one. It does not need validation since it was already picked. And when it comes to elevation, there is nothing. Nothing can stop it. That's why they're staring wide-eyed and dumbfounded, struggling to grasp on a power that was never really theirs since the transition has already started. This is more than simply another moment in time. This is a total reassessment of what they assumed was permanent. The ground they previously stood on with confidence is now breaking under them. The system they created, the control, they held to the illusions that they relied on. It's all unraveling. And why? Because God is moving. This is what occurs when the scheduled moment coincides with an unstoppable purpose. They wrote laws that no longer apply. They developed buildings that no longer support weight. They no longer have any actual authority. Therefore, the titles they granted themselves are meaningless. It was all borrowed, transient, and an illusion designed to prevent the genuinely selected from reaching their full potential. But they made a mistake. They believed they could hold anything divinely set aside. They believed they could repress what was bound to rise. They believed they could assess your value as if your destiny was in their hands. But the minute heavenly favor intervened, everything changed. The cornerstone of their phony authority collapsed. What was once unyielding is now dust under your feet. This is what occurs when the chosen one takes their proper position. The old order shakes. The past collapses. Those who formerly set the rules are now lost in their own game. They do not know what to do. They don't know how to reclaim the control they previously had, since the screenplay they authored has become useless, as has the power on which they built their careers. It is fading away. The barriers they created to keep you out are now locking them within. The strategies they employed to control others are now working against them. They are attempting to cling to relevance, to an authority that no longer exists, since the tables have turned. They are well aware of this. It was never about prestige, about competition, regarding who was in and who was out. This was always about something bigger, something predetermined, something no man, system, or plan could ever stop. And now they are forced to stand there and observe, because what is occurring cannot be reversed. When God's hand is on anything, it does not want permission. It does not wait for validation. It does not move like humans anticipate. It takes over. It rewrites the rules. It rearranges the boards. It elevates individuals who were previously neglected and brings to light those who believed they were untouchable. And now they are seeing it firsthand. They sense it. They see it. They cannot refute it. And yet, this is just the beginning. The grip they had is slipping. The power they once held with ease is no longer theirs to command. The structure they exploited has crumbled, leaving them with nothing except the vestiges of a time when their word was law. What was once their throne is now an empty seat, a remnant of a bygone paradigm that no longer holds power in the present. And at the center of it all is something beyond their grasp. Unshaken, unchallenged, unwavering. They made a mistake in their calculations. They believed they understood the boundaries of their capability. They assumed they could foresee the consequences. They assumed they had control over something they never owned. They can't stop now as they strive to fathom a world that isn't constructed around their reign. The realization sets in. They never had control to begin with. What is happening today is not just a change, but a whole rewiring of the framework they formerly ruled. The old methods have lost their traction. Their methods have no leverage, and the reality of what is happening makes them helpless. They don't know how to respond, since this isn't a war they can win or a game they can control. This is unfolding. They were never intended to meddle. Please pause for a bit, since this is not for everyone. Some people will go over this without a second thought, and that is great. However, this is for those who experience a profound and unshakable resonance. Those who have consistently seen more than what was provided. Those who never fit in with the norm. Those who have been instructed to reduce themselves, to stay undetected, to comply. But it was not your route. You were never intended to follow in the footsteps of those who came before. You are not looking for recognition, not looking for validation, not here to seek acceptance from people who do not understand your purpose. You tread this route not for acceptance, but because it has always been yours to claim. Here's to those who turn misfortune into strength, transforming every effort to break them into the very foundation on which they stand. Those who possess knowledge that has been instilled rather than learned. Who do not wait for permission and move with power that requires no justification. Those who have never belonged to the old world, since they were always designed to create something new. They believed themselves that you would never leave their orbit, and that their influence was the axis around which everything revolved. They put themselves on a pedestal, thinking that they alone determined who was seen, appreciated, who rose, and who was forgotten. But their biggest mistake was assuming they could control something that was never intended to be controlled. The structure they developed, which positioned them as the gatekeepers of success, was always based on a shaky basis. The framework is now disintegrating, and for the first time, they must face the reality. You are never limited by their expectations. You were never designed to fit within the tight space. They attempted to keep you inside. Their illusion is eroding, and they are aware of it. They repeated their own falsehoods so often that you required their affirmation, recognition, and approval to matter. However, as they see you glide by them with ease, they are confronted with an excruciating truth. You didn't need them at all. Every time you enter the room, the energy transforms. Their strained grins, their shaky composure, the unease in their gaze. It all reveals what they hesitate to say. They are unraveling, and they have no idea how to stop it. For the first time, they have lost control. Their once unquestioned power has waned. They spun a web, one based on deception, manipulating views, and preserving an appearance of authority is collapsing. They established their identity via control of the tale, opportunities, and the sense of authority. However, they are no longer able to direct the course of events. They are left with nothing except the burden of their own irrelevance. And you? You did not need to battle. Didn't need to justify. There was no need to prove anything. You just walked away. You refused to meet their expectations. Refused to play a game meant to keep you below them. And it is what worries them the most. Their universe was based on the assumption that they were indispensable. But without them, everything would be still. But now they stand on the sidelines, watching while everything goes on without them. Your success no longer depends on their engagement. Your growth proceeds without their intervention, and your existence exists without their consent. Their carefully managed image, exaggerated importance, and hitherto unquestioned relevance. Everything melts away, leaving behind a reality they can't change. They race to cling on, looking for methods to stay relevant and recapture what they'd lost. The time for it is gone. The world has moved on. And so have you. The tide has turned. Their authority is diminishing, and the regions they formerly governed are no longer under their control. They act to be unconcerned, as if your existence is insignificant and your accomplishments go unrecognized. But underneath the surface, the reality remains. They are watching. They pay attention. They examine your every move, not out of adulation, but out of a need to comprehend how you keep rising. They persuaded themselves that your improvement would only be fleeting, that you will eventually stumble. But you never did, and this haunts them. Their quiet does not indicate disinterest. It's obsession masked as indifference. They keep track of every piece of data that shows you are still going ahead, still growing, still unshaken. They don't admit their interest, but it betrays them. Every turn, every milestone, every time you step into something larger erodes their well-kept facade. They were formerly the storytellers who shaped the perception of power. They are now spectators in a story. They have no control over it. And the worst part? The narrative continues to unravel. Without them, they thought it was all a game. However, with the correct pressure and manipulation, they can bend you to their will. They used their efforts trying your patience, tempting you into confrontation, and laying the groundwork for your collapse. They spoke half-truths, sow seeds of doubt, and created diversions in order to prevent you from realizing what was really going on. But they didn't comprehend you'd never go on their terms. Every decision you took was intentional. Every move you made was connected to something larger. While they maintained control, you went beyond it. They don't comprehend it. They do not know how to deal with an opponent who refuses to engage, and foe who does not fight as expected. They pushed. They prod. They're waiting for you to falter. But they are just greeted with silence. You don't answer. You don't acknowledge. And it is what destroys them. The game they attempted to play has imploded in on itself. And now, every action they make demonstrates how little authority they really had. The plan they previously depended on is no longer relevant, and they are left with only the awareness that the fight was lost before it ever started. The mood alters as soon as you enter. It's not about creating a fuss, claiming space, or seeking approval. It's something unsaid and unmistakable. They can't exactly put it into words, but they feel it. A presence that alters the flow of the space. A weight that influences the unstated dynamics. Some halt mid-set, while others stiffen. Their confidence has abruptly weakened in ways they cannot understand. The atmosphere intensifies, not with dread, but with awareness. An awareness that something much beyond their control is in their midst. True authority does not have to be declared. It does not beg, does not plead, does not push itself into significance. It just exists, undeniable and unmoved. They attempt to justify it, reduce it to chance, and call it a coincidence. But, deep down, they understand better. This is something they cannot imitate, borrow, or take. It's something inherent, which they could never have. And that realization, it lasts long after you've departed. You were formerly responsible for explaining, justifying, and proving yourself. But those days are gone. Your silence holds more weight than any words could. The places where you previously stood seem different without you. Conversations lack the zeal they formerly had. They avoid discussing it and refuse to admit it. But the absence is felt. Those who formerly anticipated your presence, who depended on your energy to feed their own, are now grabbing at shadows. It was never about them maintaining power. It was about them siphoning your money. They misinterpreted your generosity for dependence, believing that you required their approval to flourish. But now, as you march on without hesitation or turning back, they are forced to dwell with the discomfort of the reality. They refuse to see. They needed you. And now, without your brightness, vitality, or the draw of your presence, the surroundings they inhabit become dreary and lifeless. They pretend it doesn't matter that your absence is minor, but their behaviors show otherwise. They can still feel it, even when you are nowhere to be found. You are not supposed to fit into their mold, to follow a predefined route, or to shrink yourself to make others comfortable. Things started to change immediately after you arrived, not because you pushed it, but because change is inevitable. When actual presence enters the picture, don't you feel it? When you're close, people shift themselves, their words falter, and the energy in a place bends slightly in your direction. This is not an accident. It cannot be turned off. Not something that can be muffled. You are not just existing. You are changing the terrain itself, including obsolete institutions, illusions of power, and structures based on control rather than reality. They are falling not because you demand it, but because you refuse to give in to them. There's no need for revolt, confrontation, or explanation. You go ahead, and the world must adapt to fit you. What seemed to be immutable is now unraveling in real time as the blueprint being changed. The rules have been amended, and the world they knew no longer exists. And whether they accept it or not, they see, feel, and have no control over it. They can't understand how one delivers a single power that dismantles all they've constructed on illusion. But the fact remains unshaken, undeniable. You are the proof they never wanted to see that the cycle they had depended on for so long had broken. They can't get away from it, whether they love it or hate it. This is the mark you leave behind, a transition that was always supposed to happen via you. You move differently today. There is no need to explain. There's no need for authorization. There is no need to legitimize something they were never supposed to comprehend. The place you inhabit is beyond reach, manipulation, and the grip of those who are still trapped by the vestiges of a false order they seek. They try to regain. However, their hands come up empty. You've outgrown the domain of response. Their remarks have no weight. The plots crumble under their own irrelevance, and the same things that used to unsettle you no longer have any effect on your environment. They deluded themselves that they were in command, that they set the rules of your life, but they were never even playing in the same universe. And now the reality hits them like a gradual unraveling. The old rules no longer have any authority. The effort they made to shape views, impose boundaries, and maintain an air of superiority has dissolved the weight you formerly bore. Explanations, duties, and linkages that served no use have been removed. You cut the bonds. And with that, you remove their last effort to bind you to their world. Now they are watching, not as rulers or influencers, but as spectators, unable to comprehend the road you have chosen. They analyze your actions, looking for a formula or a trend. However, there is no one they can follow. They're wondering how they lost their grip, how their absence made no difference in your movement, how their presence was never critical to your advancement. They mutter between themselves, but the weight of their words dissipates before they land. They try to organize interference, but their power has already dissipated, leaving them groping at shadows, unable to touch what is no longer theirs. Each step is deliberate. Each step is exact. Every choice is rooted in something much beyond their comprehension. And while they flounder, fumble, and seek methods to restore relevance, you go on. Unmoved, untouched, unstoppable. Allow them to observe. Allow them to inquire. Allow them to grapple with the truth that the power they attempted to suppress is now one they will never overcome. Did you feel it? The change in their energies, the subtle unfolding of their acts. This is when they realize who they underestimated. The ones they attempted to quiet and discard now move freely,